Pause for a moment. Look down at the shirt you are wearing or the phone glowing in your hand. Can you feel its weight? Not the physical weight, but the weight of the thousands of miles it has traveled. That shirt might be woven from cotton grown in the US, stitched in Bangladesh, branded with an Italian label, and sold to you in Vietnam. Why is this insane, convoluted process cheaper than having your neighbor, a tailor, make it for you? And more importantly, why does the cheapness of that shirt imply that the wages of a factory worker in an industrial town halfway around the world are suppressed, or that your own job is more precarious than ever? We often think of economics as dry numbers on a financial ticker. In reality, it is the script of our lives. It determines who gets rich, who gets poor, which nation becomes a factory, and which nation becomes a bank. In 1977, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded the Nobel Prize in economics to two men, Bertil Ohlin, Swedish, and James Meade, British. They didn't invent the atomic bomb, but what they saw was no less explosive. They decoded the DNA of international trade. They were the ones who foresaw the massive matrix binding us today. Their story isn't about charts. It's about the brutal yet mesmerizing truth of a flat world. Why money and goods move like water, defying all human barriers. Have you ever wondered why you work harder than your parents did, yet your sense of financial security feels more fragile than ever? The answer lies within the theory these two men built. To understand the stature of Ohlin and Meade, we cannot view them through the lens of 2025. Rewind the tape of time to the mid-20th century. It was the post-World War II era. The world was licking its wounds and trying to rebuild order. Before this, nations were like sealed fortresses. Tariffs were sky-high. Capital flows were strictly controlled. But then an undercurrent began to rise. Borders became porous. Goods started flowing from one place to another at unprecedented speeds. In that chaotic context, classical economists were still fumbling with old theories from the days of David Ricardo, who spoke of England selling cloth and Portugal selling wine. But the world had become far more complex than wine and cloth. Capital, money, machinery, and people began to move. This is where Bertil Ohlin stepped into the light. Ohlin was not a scholar hiding in an ivory tower. He was an energetic politician, serving as Sweden's Minister of Trade and leading the Liberal Party for over 2 decades. He understood the game from the inside. He saw that trade was not just the exchange of goods, it was the redistribution of the planet's resources. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, James Meade, a brilliant mind of the Cambridge School who had worked with the legendary John Maynard Keynes, was wrestling with a different problem. If Ohlin was concerned with why we trade, Meade worried about how we survive when we trade. He saw the fragility of economies when they opened their windows to the wind. A sneeze on Wall Street could cause pneumonia in London. The pairing of Ohlin and Meade in 1977 was no accident. It was the world's admission that the era of isolation is over. We are entering an era of suffocating interdependence. Imagine the global economy as a dense, wild forest. Bertil Ohlin was the man standing on the mountaintop looking down. He saw the geological structure of the forest. He asked, why do oaks grow in the freezing north while palms grow in the tropics? He didn't believe in randomness. For Ohlin, everything had an order based on endowments. His theory, later known as the Heckscher-Ohlin model, became the Bible of international trade. It explained a simple but shocking truth at the time. Nations don't trade because they want to. They trade because their resource composition compels them to. A country with abundant land but few people will automatically export wheat. A country with abundant capital but few natural resources will export machinery. Sound obvious? But wait. This implies a terrifying truth. The economic fate of a nation, and of you personally, is largely predetermined by factors beyond human control.
If you are born in a country with a surplus of cheap labor, your wages will be pressured downward by global policy, no matter how hard you try. That is the cruelty of supply and demand on a global scale. Conversely, James Mead was the diligent gardener walking between the rows of plants. He didn't care much about why the plant grew there. He cared about how to keep the garden from flooding when the storm came. Mead was the master of the balance of payments. He pointed out that when you open the door to trade, you accept letting toxic winds from outside blow into your bedroom. What must a government do? Raise interest rates, devalue the currency, or impose tariffs? Mead spent his life designing complex pressure valves to help nations avoid collapsing under external shocks. This contrast creates the beauty of the 1977 Nobel. One man explaining the natural laws of the flow, Olin, and another designing the dam to control that flow, Mead. But why should this make you feel afraid, or at least wary? Because the laws they discovered are operating right now, silently siphoning money from one person's pocket to another's without anyone noticing. Do you ever feel angry that housing prices skyrocket while wages stagnate? Would you believe me if I said that a deep-seated cause lies within the very flows of international capital that Olin and Mead analyzed half a century ago? We are living in a house designed by them, yet we rarely understand its foundation. And when you don't understand the foundation, you never know when the floor beneath your feet might give way.
We know that Bertil Ohlin and James Mead were the architects of the flat world. But specifically, what laws did they uncover that make the global economy operate like a machine, crushing our illusions of local stability? Brace yourself. What you are about to read might explain why your parents could easily buy a house on an average salary while you struggle despite having a master's degree. It's not necessarily your fault. It is the consequence of a theorem called factor price equalization. Bertil Ohlin didn't work alone. He built his theory on the foundation laid by his mentor, Eli Heckscher. Together, they created the famous Heckscher-Ohlin model. Imagine the world as two giant water tanks. Tank A, e.g., the US or Western Europe in the 70s, has abundant capital, money, machines, but scarce labor. The wage water level here is very high. Tank B, e.g., developing Asia, has very little capital, but an overflow of labor. The wage water level here is very low. Before free trade, the valve between the two tanks was shut tight. People in Tank A enjoyed sky-high wages because they were scarce. People in Tank B accepted low wages because they were abundant. But Ohlin pointed out a shocking truth. Trade in goods is actually the movement of people and capital in a different form. When the U.S. imports shirts from Vietnam, the U.S. is not just buying fabric. The U.S. is effectively importing Vietnam's cheap labor. Conversely, when Vietnam imports machinery from the U.S., Vietnam is importing American capital. What happens when you open the valve? Free trade. According to Ohlin's theorem, you don't need Vietnamese workers to physically migrate to the U.S. to drive down U.S. wages. As long as goods move, the result is identical. The wages of unskilled labor in both countries will tend to converge. This is the painful eureka moment. The relative decline in the income of the working class in rich countries was not an accident. It was an unavoidable mathematical calculation by Ohlin. When borders open, your wage is no longer protected by a powerful passport. It is thrown into a common pool with billions of others. This truth triggers a deep personalized fear. Do you feel like you are running in a hamster wheel that keeps speeding up? That is because your competitor is no longer the colleague at the next desk, but someone 5,000 miles away who is willing to do your job for 1/10 of the price.
If Ohlin showed us why our wages are under threat, James Mead showed us why governments are clumsy and often fail to save us. Mead was a quiet, modest man, a stark contrast to the flashy economists of his time. He viewed the national economy like a tightrope walker balancing with a pole. He introduced the concept of the conflict between internal balance and external balance. Internal balance, the desire of every citizen, jobs, low inflation, economic growth, peace inside the home. External balance, the desire of international creditors, stable exchange rates, no balance of payments deficit, reputation on the street. Meade discovered a tragedy. These two goals are often in direct conflict. Imagine an economy in recession, like in 2008 or during COVID. To save internal balance, create jobs, the government must pump money and lower interest rates. The citizens rejoice, but that action immediately shatters external balance. Cheap money devalues the domestic currency, and foreign capital flees the country seeking higher returns elsewhere. The result? The government is forced to U-turn, raise interest rates to save the currency, but in doing so, they strangle domestic businesses and cause unemployment. Have you ever felt righteous anger seeing the central bank raise interest rates even as people are drowning in debt? Don't be too quick to call them heartless. They are trapped in the Meade dilemma. They are forced to sacrifice one of the two, either your job or the value of the money in your wallet. There is no perfect third option.
Why did the 1977 Nobel Prize pair these two men? Because they are two sides of the same coin. Allen explains gravity. Free trade will level everything. And Meade explains humanity's desperate attempt to defy that gravity. Macroeconomic policy. The world we live in is the battlefield between these two forces. On one side is the cold flow of capitalism, seeking the cheapest place to produce, Allen. On the other are governments sweating bullets trying to build seawalls to protect their citizens without isolating themselves, Meade. The terrifying part is, Allen's gravity seems to always win. We often hear politicians promise, "I will bring jobs back. I will protect domestic manufacturing." But through the lens of Allen and Meade, those promises are often hollow. You cannot simultaneously open the windows to let in the sun, foreign investment, and expect to keep out the wind and dust, wage competition. There is a bitter intellectual superiority when you realize this. You start to see through populist slogans. You understand that the rules of the game were designed to operate this way long ago, and the fluctuations in your wallet are the price paid for a giant machine called global efficiency.
We have traversed the theory. Now, look out the window. The world of 2025 is the giant laboratory proving the predictions Olin and Meade made half a century ago. No illustration illustrates Bertil Olin's theory more clearly and brutally than the rise of China over the past 30 years. Following Olin's script exactly, China, abundant in labor, opened its doors. Billions of hands joined the global labor market. The result? 1. In China, wages rose, living standards improved, hundreds of millions escaped poverty. Factor price equalization working positively for them. 2. In the US and Europe, factories closed. The Rust Belt was born. Blue-collar workers lost jobs or accepted stagnant wages for decades. But here is the terrifying point Olin implicitly warned about: inequality. In rich countries, who benefits from trade with China? The owners of capital. Apple, Nike shareholders, and high-skilled workers, designers, marketing directors, the factors rich countries have in abundance. Who gets hurt? Unskilled laborers, the factor that rich nations are relatively scarce in compared to the ocean of people across the ocean. A sense of fatalism begins to creep in. You realize that the wealth gap isn't just due to the greed of local billionaires. It is an inevitable consequence of the global trade structure. The rich in New York and Shanghai are becoming more like each other than they are like the poor in their own countries.
Now let's talk about James Meade and Vietnam. Do you remember the 1997 Asian financial crisis? Or the exchange rate fluctuations that left Vietnamese businesses reeling? That is Meade's ghost returning. Vietnam, an open economy, trade openness up to 200% of GDP, is like a small boat in the ocean. We want to export a lot, need a low exchange rate for cheap goods, but we also want macro stability. Need a stable exchange rate so people don't rush to buy gold or USD. Meade warned, you cannot have it all. When the Fed, U.S. Federal Reserve, sneezes, raises interest rates, the State Bank of Vietnam is forced to take medicine. If we don't raise rates, foreign capital, FDI, FII, flees back to the U.S. The exchange rate skyrockets, imported gasoline becomes expensive, inflation explodes. If we do raise rates, domestic businesses suffocate under high capital costs, real estate freezes. This is where you feel a strong validation. The times you wondered why bank interest rates danced wildly, why gas prices rose, why the state struggled to manage, it wasn't incompetence. It was the price of integration. We are playing on Meade's chessboard, and the rules are harsher than we imagined.
But the story doesn't end there. 2025 brings a variable that neither Olin nor Meade foresaw: artificial intelligence, AI, and remote work. In the old days, Olin said labor was the factor that was hard to move. A weaver in Bangladesh couldn't sit in Dhaka and sew a shirt for someone in London. The shirt had to be transported. But today, a programmer in India, an accountant in the Philippines, or a graphic artist in Vietnam can work directly for a company in New York without leaving their bedroom. This is the second Olin wave. This time, it's not attacking factory workers, it's attacking the white-collar class in rich countries. Your job, writing, designing, data entry, analysis, has now become a good that can be easily traded internationally. If we apply Olin's theorem here, what happens? Wages for online white-collar jobs will tend to equalize globally. Good news for Vietnamese talent. You can earn global wages. Bad news for the average Western office worker. Their wages will be pulled down to match yours. And on the flip side, AI acts as a massive, cheap source of capital. It replaces labor. It upends the capital-labor balance Olin once built. Do you feel a shiver? Personalized fear. The glass cage protecting your intellectual job is being shattered. You are no longer just competing with people in your city. You are competing with a brilliant student in Mumbai and an AI bot in Silicon Valley at the same time.
We have spoken of the cold flows of capital and goods, but there is one thing the mathematical equations of Bertil Allen and James Meade often overlooked, or at least could not fully measure: human emotion. When the 1977 Nobel Prize was awarded, the world was still intoxicated with the dream of integration. But Olin and Meade, in their own ways, implicitly foreshadowed the rage we are witnessing today: Brexit, populism, and the resurgence of tariff walls. Unlike the stereotypical bookish image of economics professors, Bertil Olin was a true warrior in the political arena. He didn't just write about trade, he lived in the eye of its storm. For over 20 years, 1944 to 1967, he was the leader of the Swedish Liberal Party, directly opposing the powerful Social Democrats. He engaged in fiery debates with some of Europe's hottest heads regarding tax policy and social welfare. Why is this detail important? Because Olin understood that economics does not happen in a vacuum. When he spoke of factor price equalization, Swedish wages facing downward pressure, he knew exactly what terrifying political implications that held. He knew that without a social safety net to catch the losers, society would explode. This is the tragedy of the 21st century. Today's politicians have enthusiastically applied the open trade part of Olin's theory, but ignored the social protection part that a politician like Olin always carried with him. They opened borders for capital to flow in, but they forgot his implicit warning. When you turn a nation into a global marketplace, you must accept that a segment of your citizens will become unsold inventory. And while goods sit still, people vote. The righteous anger of unemployed workers in the Midwest, USA, or protesting farmers in France is not blindness. It is a logical reaction to a game where they were predestined losers, a game Olin saw through long ago.
If Olin was fire in the parliament, James Meade was a quiet iceberg.
Meade was quintessentially British, modest, gentle, and incredibly meticulous. Legend has it that when he received the news of his Nobel win, he was walking in his garden. His reaction wasn't to throw a party, but to worry about whether his upcoming lecture would be disrupted. But behind that quiet exterior was a sharp mind that saw through the impotence of governments. Meade had worked in the British War Cabinet during WW2. He had witnessed firsthand the collapse of the old world order. Meade was obsessed with finding a mechanism for nations to cooperate rather than destroy each other. He was one of the quiet architects of the GATT, precursor to the WTO and the IMF. But what made Meade great, and what tormented him, was his realization of the limits of national power. He pointed out that in an open world, as Olin described, governments lose control over their own economic destiny. Tools like interest rates or exchange rates become blunt. When you see your country's central bank struggling to decide whether to pump or drain money, don't mock them. They are facing Meade's ghost. Meade proved mathematically that the number of policy targets, jobs, prices, balance of payments, is always greater than the number of tools the government has in hand. In other words, the government always has to sacrifice something. And, tragically, what gets sacrificed is often the interest of the voiceless, those who cannot move their assets offshore.
There is an open secret in economics stemming from the era of Olin and Meade that few tell you. It is the compensation principle. The theory goes, free trade makes the overall pie bigger. Although there are winners, exporters, and losers, those facing competition, because the pie is bigger, the winners could compensate the losers, and eventually everyone would be better off. This is why free trade agreements, FTAs, are signed with such fanfare. But what is the reality? The pie did get bigger, just as Olin predicted. But the compensation never happened, the very thing Meade feared. The winners, multinational corporations, the financial elite, pocketed the massive profits and used political power to dodge taxes or lobby. The losers, workers, small businesses, were left with the promise, just go learn a new trade. Your feeling of fatalism when hearing about GDP growth while your wallet remains empty is not wrong. You are the victim of a broken promise. Olin and Meade drew the treasure map, but they were not the ones distributing the loot. In 1977, when these two men accepted their awards, the world was on the threshold of the neoliberal era, where the market was deemed God. But ironically, both Olin and Meade were proponents of state intervention, albeit in different ways. Olin believed in social welfare. Meade believed in international macro-regulation. They were honored for explaining how free markets work, but their advice on how to control free markets was forgotten in the profit-drunk decades of the 80s and 90s. Today, as we see nations returning to tariff walls, as we see America turning inward, it is not a refutation of Olin and Meade. On the contrary, it is the strongest evidence that they were right. The system is correcting itself after too long of ignoring the balance Meade always craved. The chart above shows productivity soaring, while real wages stagnate. It is the visual representation of a post-Olin and Meade world lacking regulation. We are living in their legacy, but we have operated that machine with greed and recklessness, and now the machine is starting to smoke.
We have traveled a long road from the cotton fields of America to the factories of Shenzhen, from the offices of the Swedish Ministry of Trade to tense meetings at the State Bank of Vietnam. The story of Bertil Olin and James Meade is not just economic history. It is a map locating your coordinates in this universe. So as we close this chapter, what should we, tiny grains of sand in the massive gears of global trade, feel? Despair or enlightenment? History does not move in a straight line. It moves like a pendulum.
Olin and Meade witnessed the pendulum swing from the isolation of the world wars to the frantic opening of the 70s. And now, in 2025, we are seeing the pendulum swing back. Protectionism is rising. Tariffs are being erected. Border walls are being reinforced. Many think this will kill Olin's theories, but they are wrong. Gravity doesn't disappear just because you build a roof. The flows of capital and goods, as Olin described, simply change direction. Instead of flowing directly from A to B, they will flow through C. Instead of importing labor via cheap goods, companies will import intellect via the internet. The mechanisms Olin and Meade discovered are the physical laws of economics. They are eternal. As long as there are differences in resources and capital between lands, the pull will exist. You cannot turn off Earth's gravity. You can only learn to fly or accept the fall.
If Bertil Olin and James Meade could sit down for coffee with you today, they wouldn't advise you on which stock ticker to buy. They would advise you on how to redesign your life's survival strategy. Lesson from Olin: become the scarce factor. Olin taught us, what is abundant is cheap, what is scarce is expensive. In a flat world, average labor is the most abundant commodity. If your job can be proceduralized, described clearly on a single sheet of paper, then someone far away or an AI will do it cheaper than you. Action: don't just try to work harder. Make yourself structurally different. Accumulate non-tradable skills, things that require physical presence, deep empathy, or chaotic creativity that machines and strangers cannot replicate. Make yourself a nation with unique resources. Lesson from Meade: build your own shock absorbers. Meade taught us, you cannot control the storm outside, but you can build a seawall. Do not let your internal balance, family life, mental health, depend entirely on a single stream of income from an industry under globalization pressure. Action: diversify. Have a reserve fund like a nation's foreign exchange reserves. And most importantly, prepare your mind with the realization that stability is an illusion. Adaptability is the only true stability.
There is a strange sense of intellectual superiority when you understand these things. Next time you see a news ticker about a trade agreement, an exchange rate shift, or a wave of layoffs, you will no longer feel confused or blindly angry. You will see the invisible strings being pulled. You will see the ghost of Bertil Olin smiling at the lines of containers drifting on the sea. You will see James Meade's furrowed brow over the financial news. They handed you the key to decode the world. They showed you that your wallet is not just connected to the bank, but to the destiny of humanity. We are living in the house that Olin and Meade designed. It may have cracks, it may shake when the wind blows, but it is the only house we have. Instead of fearing its collapse, learn to reinforce your own footing. Because in this flat world, there is no hiding place that is absolutely safe. Only understanding is the ultimate shield.